Welcome to the dark side of the rainbow. I am your host, Robert Wallace, and this is a Gays Against Groomers production. Today we have Jennifer Say with us. Jennifer is the founder of the XXXY athletic clothing brand. She's standing up for women's sports, and let's just keep the boys out of the girls' bathrooms. I mean, that's a side issue, but how you doing, Jennifer?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here, Robert.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. So, if you would, could you give our audience a little introduction into who you are and how you found yourself on this journey to creating this clothing brand?
Oh, goodness. Okay, I'll try to make it brief-ish. So the first thing I'll say is I was a very serious athlete as a child. I was an elite gymnast. I was the 1986 national champion, 7-time national team member. And as most people, I think, are aware at this point, gymnastics is a pretty abusive training culture. And despite my successes 20 years after leaving the sport, I was really struggling with what I had gone through in the sport. And I wrote a book in 2008 called Chalked Up, which really exposed the emotional and physical and sexual abuse in the sport. It was a memoir. And that was 10 years before the Larry Nassar case broke. He was the team, quote unquote, doctor that abused over 500 young athletes, including Olympians. And so at the time when I spoke out about it, it was not well received. I'll just say that. the entire community of gymnasts, my teammates, coaches, USA Gymnastics, they really kind of dragged me across the internet. But I stayed strong and continued to call out the abuses. And eventually we know it was very much exposed. And I think, unfortunately, it's still a problem, but I think it is getting better. At least they're saying they're trying to make it better versus just covering it up. So hopefully it will get better. So that's the first thing. Second thing is I have a long-standing career in fashion and apparel. I worked at Levi's for 23 years. Which is a very long time. I left there in 2022. I was the brand president at the time. I found myself during COVID standing up for kids once again, and I was very vocal about the need to open public schools. Private schools were open. Let's just, call that out for a second. And I lived in San Francisco, which is incredibly left-leaning, as most folks know, and that advocacy did not go very well for me. I ended up leaving San Francisco, basically getting chased out and leaving Levi's. I resigned in 2022. And now I'm getting the part why I started XXXY. When I began to interview for jobs again, jobs that I was very capable of doing, CEO jobs at major corporations, I was repeatedly asked if I would apologize for what I had done, meaning advocate for children and open schools during COVID. And this is in 2023. So my answer was, why would I apologize? I was right about everything. But I realized I would not be able to go back into corporate America and keep my voice and, be myself. And you basically need to follow a script. And so I decided to start my own brand, which combines my background as an athlete, my corporate experience in fashion, and my penchant for saying true but inconvenient things.
Wow. Deadly combination for
it's a lot.
The clothing industry in this climate.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, I looked around at all the big athletic brands that claim to stand up for women, and they are completely silent on this issue of males entering women's sports. And I felt like they're all hypocrites and liars. They're not really championing women. They aren't championing women's sports. They're silent on this, and they're, woke virtue signaling about males and women's sports. They're on the wrong side of the issue. So I'm going to start my own brand, and I'm going to normalize standing up for women and girls.
That is so fabulous that you've gone through this, that at the end, you weren't afraid to stand up for what was right. And then you actually did something about it. Whereas a lot of people would seek to shelter and protect themselves and their career, even if they know what they're doing is wrong. So I applaud you for that. Thank you, Jennifer.
Well, thank you. And thanks for what you guys do. It's not easy. I know.
It's not easy. And a lot of people in our group put up with all kinds of stuff, and everybody in their activist journey is going to be confronted with something. And so, it gets hard. It gets hard to speak out, but it gets easier and easier as you do it more and more. Because
Well, you find new community. I mean, that's the hard part is I did lose a ton during COVID. I lost most of my friends that I had had for, over 30 years. They found my views so abhorrent. And I lost, their family members that don't speak with me. I walked away from a job that I really loved. But I found new community, and the cool part is within this new community, we don't agree on everything, and that's fine. We agree on this issue that sex is binary, women deserve their own sports and spaces, and we'll fight together on that. And if we disagree on other stuff, that's fine too. Who cares? Like isn't that America? Like, when did we get to this place that if you disagree on anything, you have to shun each other? It's ridiculous.
no, that's a great point. Like left, right, and center, all you hear all day is democracy, democracy. Even though we're a constitutional republic and not technically a democracy. Side point. But democracy itself means like group statistics, like who is the majority vote, and so we have to argue both sides. And now we have a side that says we are above arguing, we are above playing this game of going back and forth. And we simply have to squash out these people, and they feel entitled to do that.
And we will censor you. Your speech is so abhorrent because we think sex is real, biologically true. That view is so bigoted and abhorrent, we will censor you on social media. I mean, my brand has been kicked off several platforms. We're shadow banned on others. We're prevented from running ads on television networks. It's insane. It's a perfectly reasonable view that everybody agreed with 5 years ago, that men and women are different. I mean, it's so absurd.
Looking back, it's almost like Corona was kind of like the cultural, in a different sense, the cultural 9/11. 9/11 happened, and we started restructuring laws, and then censorship and things started coming about. But really during COVID, then you started to see the implementation of all of these very woke agendas, including, of course, the trans ideology, which is like overnight popping up.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think during COVID, what you also saw was just, unabashed government censorship for the first time. I mean, it might have been happening kind of underneath the covers, but now they're just out and about it. Yes, your speech is misinformation or disinformation, and you must be monitored. The First Amendment is now viewed as an impediment to our safety, not the foundation of our country and living in a free country. You have people like John Kerry, you have people like the newest Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson, saying the First Amendment is hamstringing the government from censoring people. It's just complete madness. And I do think it really was cemented and accelerated during COVID. And it was a test run for what Americans would accept. And we failed because we accepted it collectively, I think, widely.
Yeah. And in terms of test runs, dress rehearsals of sorts, obviously this isn't going to be the last wave of indoctrination, the last wave of fear mongering and governmental terrorism on its citizens. So, we find ourselves like people who weren't paying attention to politics or like, well, since COVID, I got involved. You hear that all the time because they start to see you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you start to see your rights being infringed upon, and you start to see the hypocrisy. I mean, I always was pretty politically involved, but I was a left of center Democrat. And during COVID, what I saw, what I observed, what we all experienced was the left. They're hypocrites. They don't believe in freedom of speech. They don't believe in protecting the vulnerable. The vulnerable are who were harmed during COVID. It was the poorest children who were kept out of school. The wealthy kids all went to school in person. And nobody, most people didn't seem to have an issue with that conflict and that hypocrisy. And I was enraged by it. And so I would no longer consider myself to be a member of the Democratic Party. I'm an independent. I think there's hypocrisy on both sides, and I would prefer to just remain independent and vote according to the issues that matter most to me and who's going to do best on those particular issues, which for me, the two that I care about the most are free speech and protection of children.
That's amazing. Yeah, a person does. It should be a non-political issue. Keeping boys out of the girls' bathroom, keeping boys out of sports, the female sports, a lot of these gender-affirming care. But unfortunately, it has become politicized. But yeah, 5 years ago, 6 years ago or so, I could have looked at the left and I would not have imagined anything like this. I mean, it was nothing like this, and so.
Yeah,
Much different environment.
It's insane. And I thought, as far as protecting our children, I sort of thought we could all agree that that was a priority in this culture, right? I thought, and that is why during COVID, I really focused my advocacy on opening schools, opening playgrounds. In San Francisco, where I live, the playgrounds were closed for almost a year. There's nowhere to play in an urban city like San Francisco. If even for the wealthy, no one has a yard. Like, kids cannot go outside and play if the playgrounds are closed. And then, of course, the masking of 2-year-olds, which was patently absurd in its face. And I had a 3-year-old at the time. She couldn't put her shoes on the right feet. She certainly was not going to be able to wear a mask with any efficacy, as if I don't think they have any efficacy anyway, but that's neither here nor there. Certainly a 3-year-old was not going to be able to do that. I focused on children, though I was opposed to all of it because I thought that was like a gate, like a bridge issue that we could all agree on. And that was very much not the case. I mean, I was called every name you can imagine, from, white supremacist, racist to murderer and granny killer and all the things. And at first I tried to defend myself against them. And then I realized you can't, because it's not grounded in any sort of rational thought. It's just meant to silence you. And if it won't silence you, it will silence others because they see what's happening and they don't want to be called those names.
Yeah, the fear of being called names, it carries with us from childhood into adulthood,
it's
adulthood, as it turns out.
As it turns out, that's right. I did not realize that. And now it's funny. I'm sure you feel this way as well. You get called so many ridiculous names that have no grounding in reality that now I just laugh about it.
Yeah, it's just a matter of slinging mud, seeing what sticks, seeing who, you can get turned off on this character by. It's very ridiculous. Title IX.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, what, for our listeners who maybe are not informed, what is the significance of Title IX and what role does that play into what you're doing with XXXY?
It's a good question. So Title IX, the real Title IX, passed in 1972. It was bipartisan legislation, and it protected women and girls' sex-based rights within the education system. Because you have to remember, in 1972, there were certain majors girls could not participate in college because they were considered, masculine. There were no college scholarships for sports for girls and women. Title IX changed all of that. And I started gymnastics in 1974, just a couple years after Title IX passed. And, suddenly there were all these opportunities for girls popping up across the country, because if a young girl could participate in sports and excel, she could then be eligible for a college scholarship. So, the most well-known part of Title IX is the sports aspect of it, which has dramatically increased women and girls' participation in sports. But it was broader than that. It was about protecting women's sex-based rights within the education system so that girls and women have equal opportunity. So it changed everything. It really changed everything for women and girls. Now, back in April of this year, which is after we launched the brand. So, this was not the reason we launched the brand. But in April of this year, the Biden administration smuggled in a rewrite of Title IX. Now, you shouldn't be able to do that. It fundamentally changes the meaning of Title IX, the way that they've rewritten it. That should have been legislated, but instead they just sort of executive ordered it. And the way that it changes the meaning of Title IX is it replaces sex-based rights with those for gender identity. That's the main sort of change within Title IX. So what that means is there's other aspects of it, but what that means is if a person that is male says they are a girl or a woman, they must be allowed to enjoy what were previously sex-based rights for girls and women, which means men now get access to girls' locker rooms, sororities, sports. That means scholarships can be given to males. Women's scholarships can be given to males. So that's taking sports scholarships away from females. So that is why I say it erases the original meaning of Title IX. And a school that denies a person's gender identity and says, no, you can't come in the women's locker room or the sorority or play on this team, will then can be held accountable for gender-based harassment, which means, and then when that happens, they will not be given a due process. They can just be kicked out of school. Their program can be shut down, whatever it is. So there's like lots of issues here. And we're seeing this play out right now with the women's volleyball conflict, which we can talk about in a little bit. But it's been blocked in about half of the states at this point. It has not gone to the Supreme Court yet. So basically right now, this new Title IX rewrite is active and alive in about half the states, and it's blocked in half the states, which is not a tenable path going forward. It's going to need to get resolved. I don't know how it will get resolved. There's a possibility it'll go to the Supreme Court. There's a possibility, depending who wins the election, that it would be rescinded. But it's crazy. It basically says if you say you're a woman, and you can have women's scholarships and, entry into women's spaces.
I used to be in wrestling in high school. I wasn't a good wrestler. I was probably one of the worst wrestlers. And I wrestled this is Jackson, Michigan. I wrestled against a couple of girls. There were some girls who had gotten onto the regular team, and in that way it just kind of became a co-ed. And I lost against those girls. And, I think it's interesting to note that because there'll be a lot of advocates, a lot of people in favor of these types of changes who will say, hey, look, girls can beat boys. And I can say, yeah, I've been beat by them. But it also makes me think in terms of, for instance, our weight classes. So, for instance, if I had weighed, 150 and then I tried to wrestle at the 119 weight class, it would not have been fair. And in a much broader way, sports specifics aside, we have differences genetically, biologically, as we all know, between the male and the female body format, between the XX and the XY. And that leads to a totally different playing field. It's not level at all. And there's little chance for the majority of people who are sitting at that, for instance, where the women are, to accomplish anything if somebody from the male class comes down over into theirs and says, hey, I'm the king of the pile now.
Yeah. And I think you raise a great point. There are fundamental biological differences. Men are on average stronger, faster, larger. Now, does that mean, like the case that you described, that a not that great male wrestler couldn't be beaten by a really, really good female wrestler? No, of course, that is possible. But it still isn't fair. At 100, if you were to wrestle in the 119-pound division, there's probably someone who's truly outstanding that could beat you there too. That doesn't make it fair, and it is the exception to the rule. And here's the example I would use. This to me is the most telling example. You have the swimmer Will Thomas, who then identified his senior year as Leah Thomas at the University of Pennsylvania. He went from being a totally average male swimmer, ranked between 400th and 500, like 462, I think was his ranking. 1 year, no difference in training, same coach, same school, to being ranked in the top 3 across a variety of events. I mean, that's the evidence right there. Does it mean he's going to be the best female swimmer in the world? No, but nobody leaps 450 places overnight with no change. The only other thing that can cause that kind of leap forward, and it's not even as big of a leap forward, is taking steroids, and we don't allow that. And in fact, the difference between a woman and a male, the biological difference, with no sort of enhancing drugs, that is greater than the difference between a male taking steroids and a male not taking steroids. And like I said, we don't allow steroids. We don't allow that in sports. So, and there's other examples. There's a golfer right now, Haley Davidson. I don't know what name she went by. He went by before. He was a totally average golfer. He played Division II golf, never placed, never ranked, never went to any major national competitions. He's now trying out in the LPGA. He just finished Q school. He's ranked like in the top 100 for women. He went from like no ranking ever. And he's also middle-aged now. He's in his 30s, which is, starting to get a little long in the tooth for a professional golfer. He just leapt forward from a golfer of no repute to somebody who's going to likely qualify to compete at the highest levels in women's golf. It's that leap forward that is the evidence that it's unfair. Does it mean that he's going to win every women's golf tournament? No, but he doesn't belong there. He doesn't deserve to be there. He's a male. He can hit the ball farther. He can drive it farther. Like, it's just the hubris that they think they deserve to do this is just kind of staggering to me.
I mean, even if this person should be like second to last, this male going into female sports, he's still robbing that person under him because somebody else should be in that space.
Well, that's exactly right. And it also changes the entire dynamic. I mean, my concern, and I'm not a huge slippery slope person, but I'm going to just play this out. If girls and women feel that it is unfair and they are at a disadvantage because a male can come into their sport anytime, and they feel that that makes it unsafe in either, contact or combat sports, girls will stop playing. And that will be the end of women and girls sports. The other issue, I think, is there's this fundamental lie that underpins all of this, which is that male and female bodies aren't actually that different. And which they are, that's a lie. If that's the true belief, which is what is furthered, then eventually you'll have no sex-based categories in sports. You'll just say everybody gets to play, men, women, everyone. And then women will not have any opportunities. They'll go back to like it was in 1971 because males will win every time. So I really feel like I know that we are fighting for the opportunities that were afforded to girls and women back in 1972 with the passage of Title IX. I also, and people don't talk about this very much, it's not safe. It isn't safe. And there have been injuries. Peyton McNabb, a volleyball player, high school volleyball player, was injured permanently, head injury, brain bleed, partial paralysis on one side of her body from being spiked in the face by a ball from a male player. Why don't we care about that? I don't understand.
Exactly. Men are capable of, in general, of course, we're speaking of generalities because there's exceptions to every rule, but men are capable of extreme levels of aggression, of force, of bursts. They have bigger, thicker bones generally. And it's silly that we're even at a place in society and in the time in our evolution where we have to parse out the differences between men and women because it's like somebody lost the plot. A great.
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. This is basically a men's rights movement. It's just misogyny in a dress. I honestly, we are told, people like me, people like Riley, to sit down and shut up and let males have their rightful place in women's sports. I cannot imagine anything that is more misogynistic than that. And I don't care if it's because he says he's a woman. It's males telling females to sit down and shut up and be nice. I don't need to be nice in that way. I'm not going to be.
Yeah, ironically, here we have a bit of the mansplaining coming from the side of men who say they're women, explaining to women why they're actually women.
Yeah, and better women. They like to tell us they're better women than we are women, don't they? They're better looking. They're more athletically capable. It's also why I don't, because of all of the advantages that you described, I don't want to have a debate about, well, if he takes testosterone suppressing drugs. No, you must be born XX to compete in the women's category. That is it. Because even if you take the testosterone suppressants, if you've been through male puberty, you still are bigger and stronger. So it just should be very, very simple. Women's sports are for XX only. I'm not trying to keep anybody out. Create an open category. Everybody can compete in the open category if they choose to. But they don't want, trans players don't want to compete in an open category. They want their identities validated by being allowed to compete in women's sports. And that is not what sports are for. Sports are not for identity validation. Go do that with your friends. Your friends can validate your identity if that's what you want. I'm not going to do it.
Exactly. And I like what you just said, that in spite of all of these little differences that people want to make an issue out of, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is that boys are in the boys category and everything that happens there is amongst them, and girls are in the girls category. And so, playing these little games of, what if I do this? What if I do that?
Exactly. No little games. Just keep it simple. It's just simple. XX women's. And this is the decision that the NAIA made, which is a college sports governing body. It's the least influential one, but it's still very important that they made this decision back in, I think, April or May. They announced they govern Division III schools, some of the smaller schools, club sports within colleges. And they made the decision and set the policy that women's sports is XX only and men's category can be open. So anyone can compete in men. And that is the right decision, in my opinion. And I would like for the NCAA to follow suit. I would like for the U.S. Olympic Committee to follow suit, but they have not. They're playing games.
An image that came to mind while we were talking earlier, and it's that stereotypical classical image of a man carrying his newly, wedded wife over the threshold. You don't see women carrying men. You have to wonder if you don't get it, why that dynamic.
Yeah, I guess they would say those are socially created constructs. I mean, the irony in all of this is it's not a construct. It's a biological reality. And I think you would probably agree with this. I'm all for expansive views of how you behave. I mean, I'm a woman. I can be quite assertive at times. That doesn't make me a man. There's all sorts of ways to have a personality and to behave. And there are women that can be aggressive. There are women that want to have short hair. That doesn't make them men. And I think, the women's movement or second wave feminism or whatever way, I think it was second, that we were advocating for that, right? An expansive view of gender, but not for the ignoring of biological reality. I mean, that's what's crazy. Like, why can't we just go back to that? And, feminine boys aren't girls and aggressive, assertive women aren't men. They're still women. They're XX. That's all. No one's advocating, or at least I'm not, for traditional gender roles. I mean, I certainly, my whole life, I've been in my relationship, in my marriage, the one that worked and supported the family. And my husband is the stay-at-home dad. And that really works for us. I'm not at all advocating for women to be meek and, not pursue careers or not pursue sports or any of that. I don't buy into any of that. But I do advocate strongly for acknowledging biological reality.
Well, that is for people who've grown up and have already moved past the school years or moved past maybe their athletic years. They can look back, and a lot of women will say, "Hey, I was a tomboy growing up." It didn't mean that I was. Right. I mean, Jamie, our founder, many people would say, "Hey, my mom actually too. She's a tomboy still." And doesn't mean she's a man. There's a lot of ways to be. There's a spectrum of masculinity and femininity, and it looks different.
Yeah, I was definitely a bit of a tomboy before I got very serious about gymnastics. I was on the boys' little league team. I could switch hit. My dad was very proud of that. As an avid baseball fan, I ended up choosing gymnastics. But yeah, I'm like I said, I'm not a conservative in advocating for traditional gender roles. I'm advocating for kids to be who they are. pursue what they love, but to acknowledge, like I said, that there are biological realities. That's it. Not complicated.
It's not complicated. From your perspective, you've been doing this advocacy work for some time. What would you say is the top concerns that you have for school-age children who are dealing with this intermixing?
Oh, goodness. Well, I feel that girls' empathy is weaponized against them. And you see across the board that girls are advocating or at least not pushing back on males entering their sports and spaces and taking their opportunities and robbing them of privacy, safety, and fairness. And young girls will literally advocate against their own best interest because they're told they need to be nice, which ironically is sort of, they're told to embody a traditional gender role and be nice. You don't see this happening in the other direction, really, because, one, females who say their males don't want to compete in men's sports because they won't win. In fact, this is the crazy part. Females who identify as male still compete in the women's category because they know they have no chance at getting a spot on the team in men's. So, I hate to see all the progress we've made as women and girls. And now, because this whole message has gotten twisted up, girls are once again being told to assume traditional gender roles, be nice, be quiet, fade into the background, and let these males have what they want. It's so completely retrograde. It's like taking us back to the 1950s. So there's that. That's a huge concern. As I mentioned before, I'm very concerned that women's sports will cease to exist if we don't change course on this. Because the fact is, if males can enter women's sports and spaces, they will eventually get all the scholarships, all the awards. I mean, we've seen instances this year. There was a relay race, a high school relay race, and I think first, second, and third all went to, there were males on those teams in the women's category. So, we hear all the time, this isn't happening that much. It's you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Well, here's the thing. It's happened at the Olympics. Those weren't trans boxers, but they had differences in sex development. They were XY competing in women's, and they won 2 gold medals. We've seen it at the NCAA finals. We've seen it at high school state track championships. There's over 700 examples in the last few years alone. So, and it's only accelerating. So I do, as someone that really enjoyed the benefits of Title IX and being a skilled athlete, as a woman, a girl, and then a woman, I worry that those opportunities will be lost to girls and women. And then there's this sort of broader issue that has nothing to do with sports, which is the lie that men can become women and women can become men. And I think feminine boys and masculine girls who probably would grow up to be gay are being told they are the opposite sex. It feels very anti-gay and anti-woman to me.
For real, they are weaponizing the gays. They're weaponizing the homosexual in you, whoever you are. They're going to leverage that to tell you need to vote for this person, that you need this right, that these people are your enemy. It's a bunch of hogwash, but we have a very vulnerable population with the gays, and there's definitely a lot of brainwashing going around in all camps, but Yeah.
I mean, do you feel, I lived in San Francisco for over 30 years. I worked in the fashion industry. I have a lot of gay male friends. I'm probably a little older than you. I'm a Gen Xer, as are my peer groups. I've been to more gay weddings than straight weddings. And I can't help but feel that many of my gay male friends would have been told as children that they were actually girls and transition because, like you said, it's a vulnerable community.
Yeah, I mean, there's like 80 something varietals of queerism in the queue of the LGBTQIA plus, and I definitely would have just probably taken on a couple of those identities. Actually, at one point, I did identify as asexual, but that was my own. I sought it out. I founded that out of a shame, out of just like, oh crap, I'm gay. What am I gonna do? I'd be like,
I'll just not have sex.
Yeah, I just don't have a sexuality. I'm just like, ghostly thing. But that's not actually how it turns out to work.
Do you think there's going to be, I'm going to ask you a question. So do you think there's going to be a separation in the LGB slash, dash TQA, whatever the 80 other varietals are? Do you think that there's like a separation coming, a divorce?
Even though Gays Against Groomers hasn't, overtly taken their position on it, for myself personally, and for so many people within the gay community, it is just, that's the biggest thing. Cut the TQIA crap out of this. We're like apples and oranges. It has nothing to do with, what direction you're sexually attracted to versus you're in the entirely different wrong body. Like, that's a big issue. And it's much different than just like having your eyes diverted in the wrong direction.
Right. It's a totally different thing, which I think people who are trans identified would say it's a different thing. Believing that you would be more comfortable living as the opposite sex is not the same as being attracted to somebody that is the same sex. And I guess it made sense to stand together and fight together, I don't know, back in the day, to have some sort of like volume and, greater impact. But it feels to me from the gay people that I know that there's a divide coming, although not amongst the young people. Don't you think the young people are all in?
Yeah, it seems like, well, there's a couple of things. We see a lot more, on one hand, some surveys up to 40% of the current youth generation are identifying somewhere in the LGBTQIA plus spectrum, which again, there's cues, there's queerisms. It's like, oh, I'm demisexual, so I have to have an emotional connection with somebody before I have sex. Okay, that could be everybody on Earth who's not
just
like
being a woman. That's just being
that's just being a person who's not like a straight up slut
psychopath
or something like that. And so it's like, oh, now because I have to know who I'm having sex with before I have sex with them, now I'm in the queue, now I'm in the gay squad. So, I mean, they're really like stealing people out from under normalcy by using and bringing people under this umbrella using very general terminologies, very general beliefs.
Yeah, the demisexual is one of my favorites. I think I think it was Governor Cuomo when he was still governor of New York before he got ousted for sexual harassment and killing old folks. During COVID, his daughter came out as demisexual. And I just thought that was the first time I think I had heard of it back in 2020. And I was like, what on God's green earth? This is the dumbest thing. This is every woman I know. That's just normal.
Exactly. It's just normal. But, they want to snatch away everybody from any sort of traditional view and bring them under this umbrella. It's something funny that when you were talking a couple minutes ago that came to mind, about how a man can come down into, if we can put it that way, into a female sport. What happens when we start saying, okay, we got gorillas who are identifying as men? So on the wrestling team today or whatever, we're going to have a gorilla join the team. And a couple of weeks later, it may turn out that he's the number one wrestler. He's the number one wrestler, but we can't be speciest. We can't be speciest. This is how he identifies. I mean, we have people identifying as inanimate objects. Like, oh, it's not just like I'm Johnny and I now identify as Sally, but I'm a human and I now identify as a toaster oven. And then you see these TikTokers who are like, let me teach you new pronouns. Today we're going to do toaster oven. So we're going to do toaster oven self. This is how you should refer to me. So I feel safe. We're setting ourselves up to.
I don't even know where to start. We have lost a hold of any sort of semblance of truth. And that's the larger issue here, is kind of fighting for, there is such a thing as objective reality. There is such a thing as truth. We cannot land on any sort of objective truth or reality if we do not have open debate and dissent and free speech in this country. If one view is always silenced, then there's a consensus that is manufactured, that is false. It happened during COVID. It's happening now during this issue of, gender ideology taking hold. And so I think, part of this battle is we have to continue to fight and push for free speech. And getting back to some sense of like common sense, the culture elevates the most insane, deranged, narcissistic, like, I'm sorry, you're not a toaster oven, and I'm not going to call you a specific pronoun today and then you get a different one tomorrow and I have to remember that, because that's stupid. And I'm not reciting my own pronouns because you know what I am. I have had 4 children. I've been pregnant 4 times. I present as a female. Like, I'm not doing that. I'm not playing this game, which is, intended to validate and normalize not normal things. Like, it's crazy. And it goes beyond the gender issue. Let me give you an example. In San Francisco, where I used to live, there were billboards running in 2020 and 2021 about IV drug use and how you shouldn't be ashamed. And, it's normal. And don't be ashamed. Don't shoot up alone. You should shoot up with friends. Well, I don't think this behavior should be normalized. I think it's harmful to these people who are very vulnerable and addicted to drugs. And I think hitting bottom and experiencing a bit of shame is, in my understanding from the former addicts that I know, what pulled them out. And so there just seems to be this push to normalize all manner of unhealthy behavior. And I think that's really problematic. There's this idea that no one should feel shame for anything. If it happens in the human spectrum, if it happens in the, human experience condition, then that's normal. That's not true. It isn't normal. We shouldn't normalize pedophilia. We shouldn't normalize IV drug use. None of those things should be normalized.
Absolutely agree with that.
And part of it, sorry to jump in, part of what's getting normalized with this gender ideology movement and trans ideology overall is autogynephilia. And, men who are aroused by imagining themselves as women. And I don't know the exact numbers. I've heard all sorts of statistics, but it's a pretty high percentage of males that are identifying as female, that it's a sexual fetish. And part of this is about normalizing that. And that puts women at risk. It really does. It puts women in women's only spaces at risk, whether it's locker rooms or prisons or battered women's shelters. So, I'm not going to normalize that either.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, exactly what you're saying is we're trying to normalize every vice, every failing of man, all of our lower qualities. Let's just bring them all in and love our dirty, ugly parts into normalcy. There's a reason why there's pieces of ourselves that we push away, that we keep in certain spaces or that we seek help for. Because it's not good for humanity as a whole.
It's good for us as individuals or humanity as a whole. And I think even this whole conflict, I'm curious your thoughts on this, around, drag shows at libraries and for children. And, having grown up in my 20s in San Francisco, I've attended a lot of drag shows. Part of the appeal is that it's subversive. I don't even understand why you'd want it in a library, like why a drag performer would want to be in a library. It loses its subversive kind of, excitement. But again, to normalize it, it has to be in front of children. That's really what it's about.
I mean, it makes me think of the Hunger Games. And, the leadership of the government, they're kind of like ours now, there's a lot of transgender bending weird stuff. It's very dystopian. I mean, that's the overwhelming characteristic of this time of the Hunger Games. It's a dystopian time when there's all sorts of weird characters coming out. And it's no longer subversive. It's normalized at that point. And so what you've just done is taken what could have been a comical, even satirical sort of performance, and then you've created a nightmare by actually building a reality around it. And so it's very dangerous. Totally agree. It doesn't make any sense outside the context of, an ironic, entertainment dance performance show for adults or whatever.
Right.
And back to what you were saying about the autogynephilia. Okay. For those who don't know, this is when a man, I suppose it could go both ways. A man dresses as a woman and then he gets turned on by it. It makes him sexually aroused. It makes him excited to put on leggings and high heels and panties and the whole 9 yards. And so it really falls under the category of fetish. And so, we're taking these fetishes, we're imbuing ourselves, or some are, with it as not just a personality, but as a sexuality, as an identity, and the corrupting all of society. Everybody who's accepting this as normal is being, especially children, who now are growing up in a world where it's not unnatural or unnormal for, if a man wants to go and, put some lipstick around his, hairy bearded lips and, put on a dress, a skirt right over his hairy legs and I mean, that's not unnatural. How bigoted of you to say anything. It's like we're turning into a freak show. I don't know how else to say it. Did you have anything to say about that?
I will tell you a very brief story. When I was very young and first living in San Francisco in an apartment with, a bunch of other people, because that's what you had to do. I had a roommate. This is before the internet. That's how old I am. And you had to place an ad in the paper for roommates. So a roommate I knew had moved out. We placed an ad in the paper, like the Free Weekly, Village Voice equivalent. And I had this roommate. His name was Bill. I was always up, we were up late at night all the time hanging out, and Bill would come home very late at night and he would be wearing a dress, but completely male, like beard, like he would wear this little black dress. And the first time it happened, we were like, oh, what's up with Bill? What's going on? This is in like 1993. And he sat down and he explained it to us. And this is the first time I'd ever heard of it, 1993. And he said he would wear pantyhose and this little black dress and jazz shoes. And he said, this is how I like to go out. It makes me feel sexy. He said, it's a fetish. It turns me on. Sometimes I wear pantyhose under my pants at work because I like it. And we were like, whoa. We never heard of it, but we were like, whatever. He kept it to himself among adults. He was very much straight. He admitted that he was straight, but he liked picturing himself as a woman when he had sex with women. That was my first exposure to this. Now, whatever. He was a nice guy. He paid his rent on time. He was fine. It was fine. He kept this to like his own bedroom, basically.
And that's the hard part, is explaining to people, look, you can keep some stuff to yourself, because a lot of people nowadays seem to think I need to be my true authentic self, which means I need everybody to see what's going on with my vagina, what's going on with my sex life and all my hobbies and all of my fetishes. And they don't realize that not only do people not want to see that, they don't necessarily need to see it, they don't want to see it, but it can have a corrupting influence on the rest of society who is unprepared to understand where you're coming from, why you're doing it.
Not only do you need to see it, you have to honor it. You have to respect it. And it's like, sex is private. Why does it, which doesn't mean it's shameful, but like there are certain things that are private among consenting adults. And that's it. Like some things aren't for children. And, I love your guy's name, and someone who grew up in a community in gymnastics where athletes were groomed by male coaches and taken advantage of sexually, were assaulted. This is exactly what Larry Nassar did to hundreds of young athletes. And, any literature you read about what is grooming, it is normalizing talk of sex with minors.
Exactly. We are sexualizing kids just by exposing them to this content, just by that Blue's Clues, here's a drag show, just by, putting those gay pride flags around the classroom or expecting people to understand it. And all of this stuff it all is in the realm of sexuality. And so what you're doing with kids, especially like prepubescent kids, and really giving kids a chance to like grow up into adulthood and then start to process the heavier things in life. We're putting all this stuff into kids and trying to create people who are raised to process this as a normalcy. So there's really no going back for future generations because it's so deeply ingrained in them.
Yeah, it's really harmful. Like I said, I grew up in an environment with a lot of male coaches. I think 25% of the male coaches on the coaching staff at my club were known, pedophiles. Essentially, the national team coach in the 80s was a known pedophile. Their strategy, they would talk, the way that they kind of normalized it is they would talk about their sexual exploits with 13-year-olds in the gym. I always knew it was weird. It made me very uncomfortable, and I avoided these men, and I evaded that type of abuse. I certainly was subjected to plenty of emotional and physical abuse, which, by the way, that emotional and physical abuse weakens you to the point and, destabilizes you to the point where I think it creates the conditions where sexual abuse is possible. But it was very common. I had one coach in particular, he just always talked about how hot women were. And, he went to the club on Saturday, and I was 13. I was not equipped to be listening to that, but it normalizes it, and they do it slowly over time. And then they talk more and more about it. And I certainly have friends from my club who were sexually abused by some of our coaches. And that's how they did it. They normalized this talk of sex with young people, and then they acted on it. And it's incredibly harmful and damaging to these women to this day. These are grown women who still suffer from the repercussions of that.
The interesting thing is when you look at a person, an adult, and you realize that they went through all of the stages that you have, or maybe you haven't, but they go all the way back to, becoming 25 and 18 and 15 and 12 and 10 and 5 and 1 and whatever. And that we've all gone through the stages of development. We've had personalities, which we've carried through these years and these experiences to become the people that we will become. And when we think about the adults who kind of have this mentality, who are either pedophiles or they are groomers by any other name, we remember that they were once children. And maybe these children had a certain temperament, they had a certain propensity. But at any rate, whatever happened, it wasn't raised out of them. Society, somehow they slipped through the cracks, and they made it to adulthood being like this. And just like hurt people, to think of what the effects of the open sexualizing of an objectification of the human body, of the youth, of the genders, what that will do to empower future adult pervs who are in the making right now. I mean, it's going to be, I'm afraid, next level, because they just don't even have any influences like they used to.
Well, I think that's right. And I think that this idea that you are your sexuality and that it is that. I remember, one of my closest friends who I am still close with, who came out when we were in college together, and he had a very difficult time with his family. They're fine now. But he was welcomed into my family, came for holidays. And I remember as we moved to San Francisco, and he started to go to the, clubs and everything. And I would go with him because I was like the only straight lady in all the gay clubs in San Francisco, because I wanted to be supportive of my friend, and it was fun. But he got to a point, he told me, where he was so tired of talking about his coming out story and his gay identity. He was like for a time, it's such a difficult time, at least it was back in the 90s. And then he was like, I don't want to tell the story anymore. I want to know what you're interested in. What books do you read? What do you want to do with your life? What movies do you love? What do you care about? And I think we're reducing people to these, something that is not a particularly interesting or important part of their character. It feels very superficial to me.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that specifically what our mission is at Gays Against Groomers, which is pretty much, to protect children from the LGBTQIA agenda. And our whole angle here is, yes, we're gay people. So we're having to kind of go into this playing the identity politics game. in order
Right.
to undermine all of the
Right.
assumptions that the mainstream media is putting in everybody's head. Oh, well, these gay people, all gay people naturally want gay rights, and they naturally want kids to be able to transition. Like, we have to like put our foot down on that narrative. If it wasn't for all that, I mean, I would rarely ever talk about being gay at all. And so I would totally agree with that. Most gay people do not sit around. Well, I don't know. I can't speak for most gay people, and I have seen a lot of gay people who really do make being gay their life, and it's a very sad and superficial and kind of meaningless existence, at least to me. But there is so much more to being a human than that little thing. And I think especially this younger generation, and with all this propaganda, particularly over the last 5 years, has got, so many kids thinking all day and night about gay activism, trans activism, putting a gay flag on something, putting a little queer something, doing all this sort of thing. And they have truly, so many people made their sexuality their entire identity. And there's not anything more else, because everything's about fighting for the right to, transition or to do all these crazy things. And they lost the first step of development, which is like, why don't you like develop as a person? Why don't you learn like math and science or whatever, read some books?
A personality. Yeah. That's
Maybe
not just an identity. A personality is not an identity, but I think we've made it. I mean, it comes back to the sort of the woke narrative, the oppressed versus oppressor narrative, and having that as an aspect, if not the primary aspect of your identity, gives you status in the community and the broader community in the world today, because you are oppressed. And so I think we're even creating, like, I don't know, there's a lot of very like average young people out there who identify as one of the crazy letters to try to imbue sort of a personality, as opposed to just having a personality. They say they're pansexual or non-binary or all these things. It's like, you're just a girl. Now go learn to read and make something of yourself, It feels like it's because we've made it into sort of a signature oppressed personality. I think we're creating people who aren't developing emotionally, they aren't developing intellectually, they aren't developing the skills to be effective in the world, because it's like they just say, I'm this, and that's supposed to be enough.
Yeah, and it's really like creating the huge division, the huge civil war that we have, coming upon us all, which is, all they do is live, breathe this whole sexuality thing, and then they're fighting against their oppressors, and that's what this is all about. And there is so many bigger issues in life than one sexuality, but unfortunately, the powers that be right now are using, manipulating, and really stirring this up in order to bring about the changes that they want for, I think, ultimately the transgender thing. And I've talked to several who agree this is kind of like goes hand in hand with transhumanism. And
I agree with that.
So if we just start accepting different variations and modifications of people, then we can start accepting robotic or genetic implementations of science, and it's just going to get ugly and nasty in the future. But we only have a minute or so left. And while we have talked in a very general way regarding the effects of men or boys entering into girls' sports, Gays Against Groomers is generally focused on like the effects on children. So all of this does apply to kids in school, not just like in college level athletics or professional athletics, which I think makes the thing even worse, of course. Because they're so much more vulnerable as young ladies. But with that said, would you care to share your closing thoughts, and then your contact information, and where people can find XXXY?
Yeah, I think check out the brand. If you go to thetruthfits.com or xx-xyathletics.com, you'll find our product. I think, there's all sorts of logo tees with statements with the, XXXY athletics that asserts, I believe in biological reality. I believe women and girls deserve their own sports and spaces. And I think sports is the sort of tip of the spear because it's very public, but it really is about the broader issues of gender ideology. But I wanted to start a brand because I think brands can influence a culture. I certainly believed that at Levi's, and I think we did with the brand as we reinvented the brand and made it cool again. And look, other brands realize this. Nike influences culture. All sorts of brands out there influence culture. And so I felt like we can do the same, and we can normalize standing up for women and girls. And every time I wear, a t-shirt to one of my kids' soccer games, it provokes a conversation. And 9 times out of 10, those conversations are very positive. And a mom leans in and says, I agree with you. She whispers it, and I tell her she needs to say it out loud. Only one time have I had a very difficult conversation, but even that was productive. I think it's important. We need to not be afraid to have these conversations. And I feel like the brand can be part of that. So I hope folks will check it out. And I think for your listeners, we do have a special discount code set up for you guys. And now I'm going to totally forget what it is, but maybe you'll put it on the screen. I think it's groomer. What it's Gaze 15, I think. So you get 15% off if you use that at checkout. And if I'm getting it wrong, you'll correct me and you'll put it on the screen for the show. But I think it's Gaze 15. Oops, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, and if it's not Gaze 15, we will make sure people get the correct one.
Okay,
but
thank you.
For now, let's go for Gaze 15, y'all.
Yeah.
xxxy.com. And for the listeners of the show, again, this is a Gays Against Groomers production. You can find our organization. We're very busy on X, formerly known as Twitter. We're very busy on Instagram. You can find us at gaysagainstgroomers.com. You can follow us at Against Groomers is the username on X with no O's. So just Against Groomers with no O's in there. And you'll see daily evidence of what we're going on about, why this is actually worth your time and attention, and how you can get involved. And if you have any suggestions for the show, guests, or anything like that, you can email podcast@gaysagainstgroomers.com. I want to thank Jennifer Say again from XXXY Athletics for joining us and talking about what's happening in girls sports. Do you know Rich Guggenheim?
Yeah, I'm going to the event this Saturday. So this Saturday, Denver at the Capitol, I'll be speaking with Rich. I'm excited.
Excellent. Yeah, Rich is a member of our Colorado chapter, and he is really heading up the whole Save Girls Sports aspect of what we're doing, and he's amazing. So you can find his content online too. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me. It's really great to meet you.
Yeah, you too. Have a great day, and we'll talk to everybody next week.